Welcome everyone to this video. In this video, I'll tell you how to change an image's background in Photoshop. This video will be divided into 3 parts. It's gonna be a very fun video, so let's get right into it. So I've opened up the image of the subject. So now let's go to select and then subject. And it'll get a pretty good selection, I think, of the subject. So here you can see it's pretty good selection, but we can tidy up the selection here near the shoes, but we'll not do it right now. We'll do it when we mask out the subject. So now let's create a mask. So now let's go to select and mask and get the opacity to 100. And now let's zoom. Now let's zoom in to this shoe. And let's go to this brush tool. Increase the size of this. I'm holding down Alt and right click to increase the diameter of your brush, and you can move your mouse up and down to make your brush soft. So right now I just want a hard brush, so I'll make it hard. And now oops, so we have to hold down Alt key. So now I'll remove all this background like this. We'll make the brush smaller and let's remove this background like this. Wonderful. Now let's add that shoe which was left out. So this was the shoe. Oh, that was the background. So this was the only shoe that was left. So now let's hit down Alt key and remove this background like this. Let's brush out this part. So let's make my brush small and brush out. Now let's hit Ctrl Z and add some radius, just like little bit, just like 1 pixel. Now let's add a lot of smoothness and a little bit feather, just a little bit, like 0.3. And then let's add a lot of contrast. This will give us a perfect sharp selection. Let's see our selection. So it's a pretty good selection. There are some bits here and there that can be improved. So let's do it. Let's go to our brush tool. Make it a little bit, not a little bit, very much smaller. Let's hold down the Alt key and just paint this out. It's taking a little bit of time. Let's paint this out too. And let's paint out this portion too. And here, this. Now let's paint this area. Let's paint this. We can make our brush a little bit bigger. And I did not remove this because no one would even notice. It's that small. let's now move to this section and just roughly do it because these parts would be very small in the final edit. Let's move and see what can be removed. So I think it's done. Now let's add just a little bit of shifted and let's press OK. So the first part of our video is done. Mask add the subject. In the next part, we would put this subject on the background and we will add shadows and highlights. So this is where we left in part 1. So now we have to take this man in a background, which would be this. So let's drag this subject, drag to this background. Amazing. Now let's place it somewhere around here. And now let's go to edit, transform, and let's flip it horizontally like this. So it's looking into that direction. And now let's reduce its size like just a little bit, like only that much. Now let's place it, so let's place it somewhere around here. Yep, that's perfect. Now the first thing I would the first thing I would like to tell you is that the light is coming from that direction, so the shadows would be in this direction and the highlights would be here. So by coincidence, on our subject the highlights are on this side. So the highlights are on this side, but we will have to remove those highlights because I would want a very like cyan type of light coming through here, and this is type of like a yellowish sun kind of the highlight, you can say. So we'll be removing this highlight. So first let's remove our highlights. So now let's go to a levels layer, flip it by holding down Alt and going in between the layers, and when this kind of an icon comes, just click on it and it gets clicked. Now let's add darkness like this, and now let's invert our mask by Control I, and now let's go to our brush tool by B like that, and we want to add that levels to this image, so we'll be on our white paint. So white should be on the foreground color, not black. So now let's zoom in, and now let's just paint in where there are highlights like that. So just this area. Amazing. So another thing I would want to do is fix this leg right here. So to do that, let's go to edit and then puppet board. Now let's add some points: head, shoulders, hands, stomach, one to each leg and to each foot. Now let's adjust it like this. I think this would look nice. Yep, that looks much better. So now let's add some more light here in this corner because I would want more light here. So let's go to a new layer and go to our brush tool and go to words like cyan type and like this kind of color And now I'll increase the brush size. I'm holding down square brackets. You can also do it by holding down Alt and right click on Windows and move sideways for the size and up and down for the softness. So softness should be 0 pixels and the size like this much. So now if you paint here, you can see it's too harsh, so let's decrease the opacity to 10%. So I'm doing here, so the shortcut key here is if you hit 9 it's 90%, 8 80%, and so on. So let's click on 1 for 10%, and let's add some more like coming through like this. And we can decrease the opacity like this much. So this is looking good. Now let's add some shadows to our subject. So let's create a new layer and put it like below our subject layer and go to the brush tool. We are on the brush tool only. So now let's go to brush and let's have a shadows brush. So I use this brush for shadows. So this brush is amazing. We can make our custom shadows with it. So if you're thinking how to make this brush, just click on a soft round brush and then you can adjust it with these white circles like this, and then you can save it by pressing on this create a new preset for this brush, and then you can like rename it and then it will be saved on your general brushes. Amazing. So now let's add some shadows. So opacity 10%, hardness 0, size should be like this much, and let's add some, or maybe first let's move this subject. Oops. So let's move this subject. Let's remove auto select and let's move the subject right over here. So yeah, that's looking good. Now let's go to our layer, go to our brush tool and paint out some shadows like this. So the shadows would be lighter here and darker here, and we can reduce the opacity of this like just to 89%. And now let's have the selection of this subject. So I will hold down Control and then click on the mask, and now let's create a new layer above levels and the subject layer, and now just add some darkness here in these shoes because realistically these shoes wouldn't be so bright. So something like that, or we can like reduce the opacity of it. Yeah, that's looking amazing. And now let's have the selection of this subject again, a new layer, and now let's add some shadows here because the light is coming from here. Here on this side there would be highlights and this side there would be shadows. So let's have a slanting shadows brush. So I just made this brush using first I made my shadow brush and then adjusted the angle with this wide triangle. So I just moved it like that. So here you can see we want to flip this brush. So let's just adjust the angle and go to a cyan color, but mostly white, like barely cyan, and then go to opacity 10%. Oops, boom, I forgot we're not making highlights, we're making the shadows, so sorry. But now we'll just paint in those shadows. So the most shadows would be here, because there would be a lot of shadows of this bag too, here, like that. Or I think we can add some more shadows, paint in like that. Yep, that's looking good. Now we can adjust the opacity to about 90%, and let's have that selection again. And now let's add some highlights. Let's flip this brush like this and choose that cyan color, 10% opacity, and just click once like this, and then we'll reduce the flow and add some more highlight down here, and then we'll reduce the flow even more and click once. We can reduce the opacity to about 90% once again, and I think the highlights are pretty much done. Now the next thing I would like to do is add some color balance to this background. So let's move it towards cyan, greens, not that much, that was too much, and blues. So this was what I was envisioning, so that was the reason I was saying I would want like a cyan type of light coming from here. So now let's add that color balance to our subject as well. So let's add the color balance, and but we'll barely do anything with the subject, like this, like barely adding those cyan and blue tones and greenish. Yep, that's looking good. So I think we are pretty much done for our part 2, and in the next part 3 we'll be adding a camera raw filter to this edit. So this is where we left on part 2, so let's continue. So let's export this as a PNG. Let's name it project 1. And now let's open that file, project 1, like this. Now let's first convert it to a smart object. And now let's go to filter and then a camera raw filter. So it takes a little bit time to load up. So now we can do whatever we want. So I was saying I won't meddle with the temperature or the tint, but I think I will because it's looking nice. So let's add the temperature to -16 and the tint to, or let's try magenta. Oh, magenta is looking good. So let's add +9. I don't think we have to do anything to exposure. We can add a little bit of contrast, just like a little bit. We can add the highlights to white and pop out the shadows even more, and we can add some vibrance, like just +5. Now let's go to curve. Now, so the first thing I'm going to tell you is the output value is the color that you selected, and the input value is its complementary color. So we want more cyan to be in this image, so let's add a input value of 4 or even 6, no 5. And I think we can add both of them because both of them will look good. So input 5 and output 5 too. And now let's go to the blue curve and go to input about 5. Sorry, not input, output to about 5. Amazing. So now let's go to the color grading tab and let's just see what works best for the midtones. So I think I'll pick magenta kind of thing, like hot pink, for our midtones. And for the shadows, I'll choose a like purplish kind of dark blue and add some dark, and let's make it a little bit more darker. And for the highlights, that cyan color and make those a little bit brighter, and we can add more of those magenta because magenta is looking really good. So now let's just hit enter, and now we have added our camera raw filter. And to compare it, we can go to our rectangle marquee tool, make half of the selection, go to our brush tool, D, go to our mask. Whoops, so it's on the slanting brush tool. Let's go to soft round, increase the size, opacity 100, flow 100, and there you go. Ooh. The difference between the camera raw and without camera raw. So the camera raw just makes your image more beautiful. So let's undo this. And one last adjustment I wanted to make was to add some noise to this, or you can say grain. I think that would add a very good aesthetic to this image. Whoops, I'm doing that. Yep. Filter, noise, add noise. So let's see on this hiker, like just a tiny bit of noise. So it's not that much prominent, but it is there. So let's zoom in. So I think that's looking good, and we can add just a little bit, like more bright, like that, like just a little bit. And I think our project is done. Thank you for watching our video. Please do subscribe to our channel because it would help us immensely. Brainy Brothers are signing off for now. Bye bye. See you soon.